Good morning. I am, in fact, Professor Moriarty. Please be courteous and silence all cell phones, Game Boys, Tamagotchis, and other sound-producing devices. If your badge was scanned upon entering this room, you will soon receive an email containing a link to an evaluation form that looks something like this. Please complete this form promptly to help the organizers of GDC improve the quality of this conference. Thank you. Warning, the following lecture is a total spoiler for Loom. If you think you might want to play the game and have not, leave now. Just going to start. Hello. Nope. Wait a minute here. Sorry, hold on. It's not starting. Playback automatically. Yes. Play automatically. Yes. Oh, you know what's coming.
Hi. So, tell me about Loom.
You mean the latest masterpiece of fantasy storytelling from LucasFilm's Brian Moriarty? Why, it's an extraordinary adventure with an interface of magic. Stunning, high-resolution 3D landscapes, sophisticated score and musical effects, not to mention the detailed animation and special effects, elegant point-and-click control of characters, objects and magic spells. Beat the rush! Go out and buy Loom today!
Not tonight, Mother Hetchel.
Especially tonight. Draw the curtains, boy. Sit here by the fire. Now, tell me, how many threads are there in a draft?
4.
Their names?
The throw.
That's 1.
The beat.
2.
The treadle and the rest.
Good. Let's see if you remember the draft I taught you. Spin it for me. Pitiful. Listen to me.
I guess I'll never learn to weave.
Rubbish.
But where do I begin?
You begin with this. Do you know what it is?
No.
This is called a distaff. Our ancestors used a distaff to spin flax into thread. We use it to spin music and light into threads of influence.
Show me.
Hold the distaff in your hands. Now, spin that draft I taught you again.
It's glowing.
It's telling you when your pitch is correct.
What happens if I spin all 4?
Let's find out, shall we? Let me shut this first. All right, listen carefully. I want you to spin those 4 threads again. As you spin the last thread, point the distaff at the ball of yarn inside my knitting basket.
But you just closed it.
Indeed. Those 4 threads form a pattern of opening. You're going to lift up the top of that basket without even touching it. Spin. Concentrate. Now, point. Not at the window.
My Lucasfilm adventure begins here. April of 1988. My wall calendar shows me leaving for Boston for the San Francisco Bay Area on Saturday the 9th. My destination was a private residence in the hills overlooking San Jose, the home of Chris Crawford, who I had befriended a few years earlier. Chris had invited a few dozen people from the game industry to meet and chat in his living room. This event, the first of what we now call the Game Developers Conference, was scheduled for April 11th, the Monday immediately following the 13th annual West Coast Computer Fair here in San Francisco. Chris gave a lecture at the fair on Sunday, the 10th, which I attended. I arrived at the hall a few minutes late. It was packed. Every seat was taken except for one, in the very front row. So that's where I sat down, beside a stranger who became the other person responsible for my Lucasfilm adventure, Noah Falstein. I took this legendary photo myself at the second Game Developers Conference in Milpitas. Noah is a gregarious fellow. After Chris's lecture, he glanced at my name badge and introduced himself as a designer at LucasFilm Games. I had not heard of Noah, but I'd certainly heard of Lucasfilm, and he had heard of me from my work at Infocom. After chatting for a few minutes, Noah mentioned that Lucasfilm was looking to hire another game designer. He asked me if I might be interested in working here. Imagine the fun of having the authority to ask that question. Things at Infocom at the time were not going very well. The company had been bought by Activision a few years earlier and was chafing under management demands for more games made with fewer resources. Text adventures were being strangled by graphic adventures by companies like Sierra and, yes, Lucasfilm. In fact, my boss had refused to subsidize this trip to California. I was there on my own dime, and I was grumpy about it. Noah and I traded business cards. I began working at Skywalker Ranch on August the 1st. The daily gourmet lunches were served here in the main house. The interior of this building is fairly spectacular. For instance, it contains a central elevator with a cage carved from a single piece of redwood. The games group, then consisting of about 20 people, had its offices here in the simulated rusticity of the stable house. And here's a mugshot from the 1988 company yearbook, and that is my business card on simulated rustic cardstock, embossed with the Lucasfilm logo. No email address in those days, no URL, no hashtag, just a phone number. The telex code there at the bottom was used by banks to wire money to George. This was my first office, which I shared with Noah. They gave me a Macintosh for writing, a DOS PC for game development, and a terminal for accessing the company network. On the PC monitor, you can see background art from Loom open in Deluxe Paint 2. And these were a few of my colleagues. There's Noah again on the right, Two of the fellows here are of particular interest. The Scumlords, Ron Gilbert and Eric Woolmunder, who together created and maintained the development system used to build most of the classic Lucasfilm adventure games, including the one I was about to make. I'll talk more about that system in a few minutes. One of the fun things about working at Skywalker Ranch is the decor. It's filled with original concept art and props from Lucasfilm movies. Soon after I arrived, the games group borrowed one of those props, the Holy Grail from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, for a photo shoot. Between shots, I borrowed the Grail for a cup of coffee. Now you know the secret of extreme weight loss. The third disc here is the only known copy of the original design documents for Loom. It's an 800K Macintosh floppy employing a proprietary format readable only by a vintage Macintosh drive. Thank you, Apple. In preparing for this lecture, I obtained a dusty old Mac which had not been turned on since 1997. After reseating all the cables and boards, I got it to boot and determined that the files on that disk are still intact and still fully readable. A few moments after making this happy discovery, however, and before I could actually retrieve those files, the hard drive in the Mac crashed and died permanently. I'll recover the files eventually, but for now you have to rely on my failing memory for how Loom was conceived. One thing I did see before the drive died was the cover of the original concept document. It bears the date August 21st, 1988, 3 weeks after I started working at the ranch. My previous games for Infocom were all fantasies, and Lucasfilm hadn't published anything in that genre since Labyrinth in 1986, so I decided to make my new game, yes, another fantasy. Now, the offices in the stable house were full of computer magazines, like Byte, PC World, various Unix journals, and one afternoon I was leafing through one of these magazines while mulling over ideas for my new fantasy game. In one magazine, which I have not been able to identify yet, but I haven't given up, I came across an advertisement for what I think was a math coprocessing card, or maybe it was a transputer. It showed a sexy photograph of an expensive-looking circuit board covered with IC chips, something like this. The copy under the photograph referred to that circuit board as a Loom. Loom. Let's strip this now classic logo of its historic trappings, shall we? We'll start by shooing away the violet swans, losing the twinkling stars, and for a few precious moments, let us liberate this word from Disney's lawyers. In modern English, loom is a word ripe with meaning. As a noun, it refers to a frame used to weave planes of thread into cloth, of course. As a verb, it means to appear as a strange, impressive, or frighteningly large form, or to take shape as an impending occurrence, as something big about to happen. It shares the sound of other words with dark, secretive meanings: womb, tomb, gloom and doom. Seeing this word applied to that circuit board touched something in me. Something deep and ready. Somehow, in that moment, the story of the Weavers and the age of the great guilds was born. Complete and whole. I spent the rest of the afternoon just writing it all down. Many people call this kind of thing creativity, as if something could be created somehow out of nothing. But I have come to believe that such moments are really a kind of premonition, an intuitive perception of eminence, a grace. So that word, the word unlocked by that word was vast, ancient. Introducing it to players adequately was going to be a pretty big design problem. At first, I thought of including an illustrated storybook in the package, as I had always done with my previous fantasy games. But then I remembered this large brick building nestled in a hillside on the other side of the ranch. This was Sprocket Systems, now known as Skywalker Sound. Then and now it houses the most advanced post-production facilities in the world, including the ultimate THX screening room, the incomparable Stag Theater. Standing there in that playground, I realized that I now had the means to achieve an old dream and bring the world and characters of a game vividly to life in sound. These two guys helped me do it. John Rieger was a freelance director of radio drama for National Public Radio, recommended to me by my Sprocket Systems consultant, Randy Tom, who has been nominated for 14 Academy Awards for sound editing and design, and took home 2 of them. The Loom audio drama was written in parallel with the game design and recorded in March of 1989 with a superb cast of British voice actors, including several veterans of the BBC. Unlike most current industry practice, our cast performed all of their scenes together in ensemble, using indoor and outdoor locations selected for their natural ambience. These digital field recordings were then transferred to 16-track analog for editing and mixing. Now, about the game design itself. The CDG, or CGD, GDC, that's hard to read. The program for this conference describes Loom as, and I quote, the first game to embody what would become the LucasArts philosophy, that players should never have to deal with dead ends, accidental deaths, or forced restarts. On investigation, this claim turns out not to be true. Here is page 8 of the Commodore 64 manual for Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, published in 1988. A version of these paragraphs appeared in the manuals of all subsequent Lucasfilm adventures, including Loom 2 years later. This philosophy was a response to the sudden death syndrome infecting many adventure games of the time, particularly those from Lucasfilm's chief rival, Sierra. It also contains a jab at the Parsivase adventures being offered by a certain other company. Now, it's true that Zack, and also its predecessor, Maniac Mansion, avoided killing the player without fair warning. But both games, together with many others, including my own, were guilty of other equally egregious design offenses, such as the inclusion of annoying mazes, the exaggerated separation of items needed to fix puzzles, and other methods of artificially increasing the time needed to complete the story. This was done, of course, to satisfy hardcore gamers who, perhaps not unreasonably, expected games with a 1990 retail price of $40, that's about $72 today, to provide at least a dozen hours or more of good, solid gameplay. For better or worse, Loom had a somewhat different agenda, influenced in particular by 2 people. Mike Dornbrook was the head of marketing at Infocom. He guided the team responsible for some of our industry's most memorable advertising and collectible packaging. Oh yes, eBay, my friend. He was also keeper of the mailing list, the names and addresses of tens of thousands of Infocom customers who had sent in registration cards or ordered merchandise from the mail order store. Mike was fond of conducting surveys with his mailing list. One survey contained several questions, among them these 2. First, what are your favorite Infocom games? And second, which Infocom games have you actually completed? One evening, over too many Mai Tais, Mike explained the results of his survey. He found a strong correlation between the games people said they liked and the small handful of games people said they had finished. It's worth noting here that my best-selling Infocom title, Wishbringer, from 1985, was an easy fantasy aimed at children and beginners, and that the idea for such a game also came from Mike. The other influence on my agenda for Loom was Amanda Goodenough, a woman with no prior programming experience, who in 1987 created a little storybook using HyperCard. Inigo Gets Out had no explicit affordance signals, no words, and no instructions. None were necessary. You just clicked on the pictures to move forward. This was completely revolutionary. Predictably, though, gamers had no interest in Inigo Gets Out, dismissing it as a toy for children and beginners. Nevertheless, we might do well to remember that children and beginners greatly outnumber gamers. And children and beginners were delighted by Inigo. Chris Crawford championed Amanda's innovation to anyone who would listen. And a few years later, Robin and Rand Miller used the same technology and the same desperately simple game mechanic to create the biggest selling game of the 1990s, Myst. In addition to the game design philosophy paragraph from Zach, the instruction manual for Loom includes this statement. Quote, Loom is unlike traditional adventure games in many ways. Its simple mysteries are designed to engage your imagination and draw you deeper into the story, not to frustrate you or increase the time required to play. You can never be stranded while playing Loom. If you're not sure how to proceed, remember, the knowledge you need to continue the story is always available somewhere nearby. Most important of all, Loom is designed to be completed. We spent a lot of time and effort creating these discs. We want you to enjoy them all. Loom was designed to be completed. By now, some of you are probably wondering how I got away with all this. So where does Moriarty get off ignoring Lucasfilm's core audience? Well, that would be a very legitimate question at an ordinary game company where the mandates are to stay in business and make money. The more, the better. But after Star Wars, Lucasfilm was never an ordinary company. This was made very clear in my first job interview with Steve Arnold, the head of the games division. With a totally straight face, Steve informed me that Lucasfilm Games had two mandates. One, don't lose money. And two, don't embarrass George. This is why I left Infocom, which was dying, precisely because they had lost the freedom to experiment. When I started designing Loom, I had every reason to believe that it would look and play pretty much like its predecessors, Maniac and Zack. It would be built with the same engine. I must admit, coming from Infocom with its twin DEC System 20 mainframes and offices full of MIT geniuses, I was a bit apprehensive about this thing they were calling scum. But when I opened the hood, I was very pleasantly surprised. In every respect, Scum was as good a tool for making graphic adventures as Zill was for making text adventures. Like the Z system, Scum compiled a bytecode, squeezing impressive functionality into a very small footprint. It was also multitasking, which made the choreography of animation and cutscenes surprisingly easy. But then I discovered the best part. The architects of Scum had done something very, very smart. Only a few assumptions about the user interface were hardwired into the engine. Practically everything that happened on the screen was controlled at the scripting level. My experiments were just beginning. The previous Scum games deployed what was essentially a menu system in which the player constructed imperative commands from a selection of verbs and nouns. Pretty much like a text adventure, except you didn't have to type. But the characters in the games never do what you're doing. They're waiting for you to tell them what to do. The connection between the player and the character there is pretty abstract. From the beginning, I wanted Loom to offer a closer connection. To whatever extent possible, I wanted the player and Bobbin to perform magic together. My first idea was to implement what is now called a gestural interface. The player would draw previously learned shapes on the screen to invoke magic spells, with Bobbin imitating your motions as you drew. Maybe not a bad idea, but there was a problem. Our principal market at that time was PC compatibles running DOS 3, and many customers with DOS machines did not yet have a mouse. Loom had to be playable with the keyboard alone, and you really don't want to make players perform gestures on a keyboard. But another kind of performance works really well on a keyboard. The user interface of Loom has only 3 affordances: walking, touching, and spell weaving. This scene from the beginning of the game is a good place to demonstrate them. The elders of Bobbin's village are flying away after being mysteriously turned into swans, except for his caretaker Hetcher, who was turned into a swan's egg. Bobbin is left alone in the sanctuary of the Great Loom with Hetchel's egg and a disc draft dropped by the Great Elder. Hovering over an active object shows its icon. Clicking on the object moves Bobbin over to it. Clicking on the icon touches the object, which can produce a variety of effects. Many objects emit musical notes when you touch them. These 4-note sequences, called drafts, are the verbs of Loom. They can be applied to any touched object by repeating the note sequence on the distaff. Bobbin's performance is synchronized with yours. You play together. So that's the opening draft you learned in the audio drama, which you dutifully listened to. And there's poor Hetchel, turned into a little cygnet. So, now up to this point in my career, all of my published games had been designed, written, and coded pretty much by myself. Loom forced me to learn a new skill, the most important and difficult of all: how to collaborate with others. Luckily, 2 of Lucasfilm's most skilled, mature, and patient artists were assigned to this project. Gary Winnick was the first artist hired by Lucasfilm Games. He had provided backgrounds, characters, and animation for nearly every title published since 1984, and had also co-designed Maniac Mansion with Ron Gilbert. Gary served as Loom's lead character designer and animator, creating hundreds and hundreds of stands, walks, swims, gestures, and falls for the main character, Bobbin. I am quite sure Gary wishes never to animate Bobbin again. Mark Ferrari was a fantasy illustrator and a master of the colored pencil. He'd been contracted by Gary to do backgrounds with Zach McCracken, despite having no previous experience with computers. When Loom was released in 1990, it was hailed as one of the most beautiful computer games ever created, due almost entirely to Mark's particular combination of fine taste, artistic skill, and, most important, technical curiosity. To appreciate the magnitude of Mark's achievement, you need to understand the technical constraints under which he was forced to work. The consumer PCs of the 1980s displayed color graphics at a resolution of, get ready for it, 320 by 200 pixels. The white square in the upper left corner of the screen compares this to the real estate of a modern 1080p display. To make matters worse, the pixels weren't even square. They were tall rectangles shaped like the gold box you see here. 2 color modes were available. Older and cheaper machines had CGA graphics with a fixed palette of exactly 4 colors: white, black, bright cyan, and loud magenta. Later machines supported EGA graphics with an exciting 16-color palette: black, white, 2 shades of gray, 2 shades of each primary and secondary color. The dark yellow was tweaked a bit, yielding a murky, intestinal shade of brown. Typical results were not what you would call subtle. Mark said it was like looking through the eyes of a circus clown on pupil dilators. But it got the job done, and because it was so simple, it compressed very well, which was very important at a time when games shipped on floppies. While working on Zack, Mark began to experiment with a technique called dithering, the painstaking application of color in checkerboard patterns to create the impression of a larger color space. His first tests were promising, but the alternating pixels played havoc with Zack's compression algorithm, so dithering had to be shelved. In a 2008 web interview, Mark wrote, and I quote, When the Zack project was finished, I sat down one morning and rendered a twilight scene with a rising moon and stars over receding oak-covered hills, all rendered smoothly and subtly in dithered EGA graphics. Then, in silent protest, I simply left the picture up on my monitor and went to lunch. An hour later, I returned to find Ron Gilbert and Steve Arnold at my desk, enthusiastically debating why Dither could not be compressed in code. Within 2 months, it could. And Loom was this new technique's first result. In discussing the visual style of Loom with Gary and Mark, I discovered that we all shared a particular admiration for this film, Walt Disney's 1959 production of Sleeping Beauty. We liked the animation of Mark Davis, one of Disney's 9 old men, and creator of the film's delicious villain, Maleficent. The dreamy, twinkling style of visual effects animator Ub Iwerks, and most especially the distinctive art and color direction of Ivan the Earl, a maverick perfectionist who managed to piss off the entire Disney production staff, but made Sleeping Beauty look and sound like no other Disney film. This montage shows a few examples of how Sleeping Beauty informed and inspired the visual design of Loom. So please don't directly compare even dithered EGA graphics with Super Technorama 70, but you can see where we're using the palettes and everything. I'll just let this play. This is an amazing, that's just a still they show in Sleeping Beauty for 10 seconds. No animation, they just show that incredible painting, right? There she is. So, 2 other artists also made substantial contributions to Loom. The first was Ken Macklin, a whimsical comic artist who created the original box art for Maniac Mansion. Ken was responsible for many of the visual effects in Loom: glows, twinkles, rippling water, moving clouds. Nowadays, this stuff would be dialed in with a particle system. Ken did it all by hand, 1 pixel at a time. I remember being introduced to Steve Purcell in Gary's office one morning. Steve handed me an issue of one of his comic books. The cover showed a rabbit and a dog, heavily armed. I opened the issue to a random page and found a crew of pirates singing about their intimate relations with manatees. Steve assisted Gary with the other character designs in animation Loom. His twisted mind was especially good at villains. Let me show you one of my favorite scenes from the game featuring some of Steve's best work. We have a little setup here. So Bobbin has just arrived at the Guild of the Glassmakers and meets Goodmold, the chief here. 31st in the Noble Guild of Glassmakers. Excellent. So Bobbin introduces himself, somewhat uncertainly. And here we have one of the character close-ups. So here we learn a little bit of legend. They say it is death to peer beneath the hood of a weaver. So Bobbin is fairly evasive on this point. So that's the setup. Now we jump forward much closer to the end of the game. We're at the evil castle of Bishop Mandible, who, being the villain, is of course pontificating about how he's going to take over the world with himself as the Supreme Commander, as villains are wont to do. So here's Mandible and Bobbin and his assistant. So we had this creepy assistant, and I was standing in the office one day with Gary and Purcell, and I said, what do we call this guy? And without the slightest hesitation, Steve Purcell said, Cobb. Just like that, Cobb. And I said, that's perfect. That's just perfect. So Cobb it was. So meanwhile, there's the scene now. Okay, I like this. This has a great scene. And it's got, so Steve designed both Mandible and Cobb, as I recall, I'm pretty sure, and did the animations for them. So this is an interesting exchange here between Cobb and Bobbin. Now, the game was available in 3 modes: practice, standard, and expert. And if you played in expert mode, you would see in the original version of the game a piece of really cool animation at the end of the scene that you wouldn't see any other way. So he's really scary. Notice how his 2 eyes blink out of sync? That's Purcell. He's weird. Right, So this is edgy. We'll talk about that later. I love this line. Okay, so Bishop Mandible needs to die. So Purcell's going to do the animation. I say, what are you going to do? He says, I'll come up with something. And I go home for the night. I come back, and everyone's standing around the office looking at me apprehensively. And I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on here? So I walk in, and Purcell is sitting there at the computer. I said, did you kill Mandible? He said, yeah. I said, can I see it? And he said, okay. So everyone's standing there really tense. And I'm like, what's happened? So if you played the game, you already know, but just savor this. So he uses the spell of opening to open the rift between the living and the dead at the graveyards of the world, which are thin and fragile. And up comes chaos, also created by Purcell. My one in-joke in the entire game. Now watch this. Loom turns momentarily into 3D. The spell of rending. My jaw dropped. That was the best single piece of animation in any computer game ever up to the time. It was amazing. I don't know how he did it. Don't know how he did it. Needless to say, it stayed in the game. Visual style was not the only thing Loom has in common with Sleeping Beauty. Both are inspired and accompanied by the work of the same composer. I was a boy in junior high school when Tchaikovsky opened the door of orchestral music for me. His melodies, among the most beautiful in Western music, have been my constant companion throughout my life, particularly the three ballets, Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, and his first and greatest ballet, Le Benedetto, Swan Lake, Opus 20. The complete score of Swan Lake has been recorded dozens of times. I own copies of every one of those performances, together with every available DVD and Blu-ray. That ballet is the soundtrack of my life. And when I finally had a chance to put music in one of my games, there was never any question where that music was going to come from. One of our contractors, a bearded guy from LA, Dave Warhol, he's somewhere in the audience here, was given the challenge of translating Tchaikovsky's score as faithfully as possible to the PC. Dave told me to send the score to a guy in Austin who we referred to as the Fat Man. Okay, this turned out to be George Sanger, actually tall and lanky and very well dressed, who provided this photograph of the actual score pages he received from me in 1989. It was George, thank you George, who first transcribed 7 of Swan Lake's 29 sections into MIDI, using Ozawa's recording with the Boston Symphony as a tempo reference. This pristine MIDI arrangement was subsequently mangled many times in order to accommodate the playback abilities of various home computers. Now, PCs in the late 80s contained no audio hardware to speak of. There was a tiny speaker inside the case that you could beep at different frequencies. Luckily, many gamers were willing to shell out $195 to get one of these. Adlib, the first mass-market sound card based on a Yamaha FM synth. Players with $500 or $600 to burn could buy a Roland MT32, which offered more channels, better sound, and stereo output. LucasFilm offered an MT32 upgrade disc for Loom for $10. Here's a comparison of how these options actually sounded. So here's the way I developed the game. Adlib audio, 16-color EGA. So next, we'll listen to Roland MT32 using the 256-color VGA version of Loom. If you have sensitive hearing, cover your ears now. I pity the testers who had to test that. Loom was announced at the 1990 Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. This was the press kit, which included an invitation to a magic show by Lance Burton and a compact disc edition of the Loom audio drama. Only 1,000 of these discs were pressed. They are now highly collectible. That's my original exhibitor badge up front. Also highly collectible. 3 months later, on the afternoon of Tuesday, the 6th of March, I handed 6 5.5-inch floppy disks to my producer, Greg Hammond, and went home to bed. Loom was finished 25 years ago today. Amazing how I arranged that, huh? I must say I had never worked so hard on anything in my life. They say I looked pretty awful towards the end. Well, at least it's over, I thought. It can't get any worse than that. Boy, was I ever wrong. That Friday night, Eric Wilmunder prepared these 4 discs containing the source code for the tools used to create and compile the game: sputum, earwax, bile, and mucus. Thankfully, these are PC format discs and still completely readable. Coming from Infocom, I was pretty spoiled when it came to packaging, but the LucasFilm marketing team really outdid themselves with Loom. The overall design is by Rick Strand. If you've never had an actual specimen of this magnificent box in your hands, take my word, it's impressive. I was thrilled when they handed it to me. Mark Ferrari did his colored pencil magic for the front of the box, capturing the atmosphere and promise of the game very, very effectively. The back of the box was illustrated by Dugald Sturmer, a really talented guy who I never got to meet. Allow me one small moment of pride. Long overdue. There are, in fact, worse things that can happen to you than to have your name appear on a box along with that other name. Incidentally, the pirate in the scum bar in Monkey Island is actually reciting the bullet points here in the back of the box. The audio drama came on a stereo cassette inside the box. The final mix, which is slightly different from the one on the promotional CD, clocked in at just under 30 minutes. Here's the inside cover of the Book of Patterns. We're still in the age of package-based copy protection here. The red gel lets you see the code you need to enter to start the game. Inside are descriptions of the spells you can find in the game with places to write down the notes. Only about half of the spells in the book are actually in the game. Part of the fun was figuring out which spell you had just found. Rick Strand did the wonderful woodcuts. I got permission to do something with Loom that we started to try at Infocom, a signed limited edition of the game, given as a deluxe gift to key members of the press and friends of the company. Loom actually had 2 limited runs, a presentation edition of 25 numbered copies for the press, and an author's edition of another 25 copies for the friends and some people who had worked on the game. These 2 stamps were used to mark the inside of the boxes. This is copy number 1 of the author's edition, which I presented to my wife, who I did not see very often during the making of this game. Very little of the art created for Loom went unused, but the glass makers always seemed to be a problem. I had big plans for these guys, big plans, but most of my ideas never panned out. This is Mark's original design for their realm, Six Flags Emerald City. But we couldn't figure out how to do it in less than a dozen rooms, so we had to simplify it. This was a time travel puzzle, which involved using the empty draft to annoy the guy filling up the hourglasses. And it got dropped, and we changed the design for the city. This stupid room drove me absolutely crazy. A hall of mirrors, one of those time-wasting mazes I should have known better than to put in the game, but really cool to look at, with multiple bobbins moving in opposite directions. Finally got it working, but it turned out to be stupid easy to solve, so we dropped it. Loom was translated into several foreign languages, including French, German, Spanish, Italian, Russian, Japanese, and I think Korean. Here are the boxes for the German and Spanish editions. Unfortunately, the audio drama was only translated twice into French and German. These are my test copies. The packages in other languages did not come with a cassette. our British distributor wanted a translation with authentic American voices. This was turned down for economic reasons. So there was also this intriguing and very collectible Hebrew edition. Somebody told me it was paid for by a private Israeli businessman who really liked the game and wanted to make it available in his own company. Can anyone read this? What does it say?
I was sent by the elders to bring you.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. I've always wondered what this line, it's the only screen, thank you. Oh, excellent. Very collectible. Okay. Loom was one of the first American computer games to have its own soundtrack album. Some Japanese technicians showed up at the ranch one morning, hooked up some PCs to a mastering recorder, and captured the music from Maniac, Zack, Indian and the Last Crusade, and Loom. A few months later, we got 2 discs, one containing music from the other games, and 1 disc solely devoted to Loom. I turned the contrast down on this picture so your eyes wouldn't bleed. The music on the disc is equally striking. Instead of using George's transcription, which is credited on the package, they decided to write their own very special arrangements, taking considerable liberties with the melodies and harmonizations of Mr. Tchaikovsky. There's also some confusion about the ordering of the songs. The overture, for instance, appears on track 4. Anyway, another Japanese company, Fujitsu, asked us to create a 256-color CD version of Loom for their FM Towns PC, a machine apparently intended to appeal to male bodybuilders. Here's the original EGA version of Loom versus the Towns version. Now here the extra colors actually work against the design of the game. In the first scene, the leaf was deliberately the only red thing on the screen in order to encourage the player to notice and touch it. In the Towns version, it doesn't stand out quite so well. Towns version had some other oddities. This scene shows Master Goodmold of the glassmakers lying in a pool of his own blood after being attacked by Chaos. Apparently, Fujitsu decided this scene was a little too gory, so they removed the blood from under his head in the room, but forgot to remove it from the much more visible icon. Luckily, the American CD version finally got it right. Odd that they went to such trouble to remove that little pool of blood, but somehow failed to remove the horrific decapitation of Bishop Mandible. Okay, so the CD-ROM version has a few other unauthorized oddities. In these screens, for instance, Chaos appears to have undergone gender reassignment. And the proofreading was occasionally a bit lax. The game was generally admired by the press. Everyone praised the art and the music, and thank goodness even the story. They politely noticed that Loom was a bit easier and a bit shorter than most games, but agreed that these qualities made it a good game for children and beginners who don't read these magazines. So the game also won several awards, including Macworld's Adventure Game of the Year and Best Interface Design at the very first CDG Awards ceremony in 1991. As I recall, Lucasfilm did really well that night. The award for Best Game Design went to Mr. Gilbert over there for The Secret of Monkey Island. I suppose I should have tried insult spell weaving. Speaking of Monkey Island, Ron, this scene got my name in the Smithsonian with a TM. Thanks for that. Yeah, there were a couple things going on in this game and the sequels. Sensing a pattern here, so this thing here, where did I go here? Okay, so Monkey Island was not the only Lucasfilm game that got on Loom's case. Some unknown artist used a palette trick in the FM Towns close-up to conceal a little message for me. And Lucasfilm was not the only company to get on Loom's case either.
The the latest bomb from master storyteller Moriarty. Boom is a post-Holocaust adventure set in post-Holocaust America after the Holocaust. Neutron bombs have eradicated all life, leaving only you to wander through the wreckage. No other characters, no conflict, no puzzles, no chance of dying, and no interface make this the easiest to finish game yet. Just boot it up and watch it explode.
I forgive them because that's actually the voice of Gary Owens. Came across this message on Tumblr, which I find curiously pleasing. Only a few companies bothered to take potshots at Loom. One company even seems to have discovered some value in it, after all.
At the moment, I don't do animation at all.
Brian Moriarty and Hal Barwood look like average enough guys, but they're from a different world. Oh, they may walk and talk here with the rest of us, but they work, play, and live more than a little in this one.
So when people play games, board games included, and computer games, you don't really think about the person behind it.
Ron Gilbert is another one of those people, along with Moriarty and Barwood, who create computer adventure games, story games. They make up only 1% of the very lucrative electronic games market, but it's quite a 1%.
It's the small part, but it's the interesting part. It's the part where the interesting stuff that's going to appear on the Nintendos of the future appears here first.
Some people, probably beginners or children, liked Loom very much. Over the years, I've accumulated a couple of boxes filled with letters, fanfic, and manga, like this one from Switzerland, which goes on for like 50 pages. A shout out here to John Christensen, who created an entire series of wonderful prints based on classic adventure games, including this one from Loom. Write down that URL and go check them out. They're really good. I really ought to buy a copy of this myself someday. One group of very serious European fans spent 5 years working on a sequel to Loom. They published the first chapter last year. Let me show you just a little bit of it.
My name is Rusty Nailbender, of the Guild of Blacksmiths, son and heir of the foreman, and I formally request your aid under the conclave doctrine, as permitted in a state of emergency.
What under earth are you talking about, lad?
Tell me quickly, please, where's your graveyard?
We miners do not bury our dead in the ground.
She means we cremate.
What? Are you telling me you're not dead?
Not at all. Not yet, maybe.
By the forge.
I would have thought I'd have more time.
Where do you think I'm going?
To claim our new arsenal. 10,000 new blades to slaughter those who oppose chaos.
I haven't figured out what these are yet. Salt pepper shakers, maybe? And this little reminder arrived in my mailbox a few years ago. Probably should have worn it here. So, I've got 6 minutes. And this part of the speech is unscripted. I'm just going to play the finale of Loom and talk about it for a minute or two. So 3 weeks ago, in preparing for this speech, I played Loom from start to finish for the first time in over a quarter of a century. I'd forgotten nearly half of it. I remember the general scheme and the plot, but many little details Many lines gone. So I had the extraordinary experience of playing my own game as if it was sort of someone else's. And through the pain of making it, I had really not been able to see what I had done. You know, it really doesn't suck. It's got moments, you know, yeah, it's shorter than normal and easier than normal, but that's what Telltale does every day now, right? So anyway, so here's Bobbin, has just been royally pissed off by chaos, and he's going to rend the loom. So fitting all of these scenes into one scene meant incredible gymnastics with the placement of the files on the disk to get all the close-ups and all the animations and all of the scene to work as one continuous thing was really hairy. One of our programmers, Kalani Stryker, actually helped me distribute the files over the disk to make this play smoothly without any disk swaps. So the ending of Loom is ambiguous. There's not a clear victory for the Weavers or for Chaos. It's left in suspense. I had forgotten how much I was pointing at a sequel in this game. And if I have a regret about Loom, it's that I did not pursue Forge and the Fold. So he just lost his crystal scythe, and Bobbin will now, having just obtained the high C, will cast Transcendence upon himself, transforming into a swan. I asked Ken Macklin, give me an effect where the swans carry off the fabric of the universe in their beaks. Yeah, ask someone to do that. With this tech, right? He did it. Watch. Look at that. Brilliant. This is 1990, people. It may not look that great now, but it was total magic in those days. So all these scenes, special versions of the screen so they would fit on this disc to make this thing happen. So we see the characters from the sequels come out and watch the swans. I'm very honored by your presence. While I was standing here earlier, yet another person came up to me. I told them that they played Loom as a child and that it inspired them to join this industry and make games themselves. I get mail like that practically every week from strangers. It's a very humbling experience to touch so many people and to have been given the absolute freedom to experiment with George's money. It was a privilege I can never repay and probably never repeat. However, there are now 3 studios who I would entrust with the sequels: Telltale, Double Fine, and Wadget Eye. Talk to me. I'm on the make. Thank you very much.